Hello, welcome, Yuma, everyone. Just like to, before we start today, whilst we're coming together today in the virtual world, we're actually joining you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri people's land here in Canberra. With my colleague Gina Gray and I, we would like to pay our respects and acknowledge the First Nations people as the traditional custodians on the continent, whose cultures are among the oldest living cultures in human history. We pay our respects to the elders of the community and extend our recognition to their descendants who are present today. So my name is Rebecca Penner and I'm the Director of the Digitisation Services here at the National Archives of Australia. I also had the great privilege of overseeing the World War II Digitisation Project, a project the National Archives embarked on for 4 years to digitise and make freely available online World War II service records held in our collection. Today I'll be sharing with you details about this significant project, what we achieved and what's left to go, along with stories of service uncovered along the way. Joining me today is my colleague Gina Gray. Gina is the Director of Reference Services here at the National Archives. Gina will share with you how access can be made to these records, specifically the World War II service records, using the National Archives online database record search. She will also explore other ways, other war service records held in our collection. So just some housekeeping before we begin. You'll notice your camera and microphone will be are not enabled during this session. Questions can be added to the chat, and we've set aside time at the end of the presentation to answer as many questions as we can within the time we've got. To start, I'd like to share with you a story that was uncovered by in one of the World War II Air Force service files by a member of the World War II Digitisation Project team. On the 10th of August 1942, after successfully carrying out a bombing mission over Germany, South Australian Flight Sergeant David Richards' aircraft suffered catastrophic damage. As smoke poured from the engine and the plane plummeted towards the earth, the crew were given the order to bail out. Once on the ground, Richards walked for several hours, eventually taking shelter in an empty barn to dry his soaking uniform. Here he was ambushed by a German civilian brandishing a shotgun, who turned him over to the local mayor. Richards was taken to a prisoner of war camp where he remained until the end of the war. Looking at Richards' service record, we see that whilst a prisoner of war, Richards received food and tobacco parcels from the Red Cross weekly and mail regularly. Also included on Richards' service record is correspondence of a request to join the Caterpillar Club. Founded by Californian stuntman Leslie Irving of the Irving Air Shoot Company in 1922, the Caterpillar Club was open to people who had bailed out of an incapacitated aircraft and been saved by an Irving parachute. The club took the motto, "Life depends on a silken thread," and adopted a caterpillar as their mascot, a reference to the silk threads used to make the earliest parachutes. Eligible members would receive a gold caterpillar pin and a membership card from the Irving Air Shoot Company. I share this story because it highlights that whilst today we're talking about a project that aimed to digitise World War II service records of individuals, records that provide us with a valuable and often poignant personal stories. Within these records, we often uncover stories about broader aspects of Australian life and connections between individuals, communities, businesses, and the government. So setting the scene. So the National Archives collection contains over 1.5 million records documenting the service of Australian men and women during World War I and World War II. These include service records for Army, the Royal Australian Air Force, and the Royal Australian Navy. In 2007, Prime Minister John Howard provided government funding to the National Archives to list, preserve, and digitise our World War I service records. This work was completed in 2010. In 2019, the National Archives received $10 million of funding from the federal government to be spent over 4 years on the digitisation and release of the World War II service records, which were not yet freely available. At the time, there were approximately 852,000 service personnel records from the Army and the Royal Australian Air Force still to be digitised. Navy cards had already been digitised. Before we talk about some of the practical aspects of the World War II digitisation project and what we achieved and what comes next, we wanted to spend some time talking about the nature of the World War II service records we hold, how the records are controlled and ordered, and the types of material you will typically find on a service record for these specific services. Service records were used to administer personnel, and whilst they are not intended to be an everyday account of a service person's activities, we can agree they provide an incredible insight into individuals, their service, and other parts of their lives. Let's start with the Army records. During World War II, Australia's land fighting force was essentially composed of two separate armies, the 2nd Australian Imperial Force, the AIF, and the Citizen Military Forces, the CMF, or militia. This separation is reflected in the way in which the World War II Army service records were controlled by the Department of Defence, and thus how they were transferred into the custody of the National Archives. We have two series of World War II Army service records, B883, the 2nd Australian Imperial Force, and B884, the Citizen Military Forces. Those of the AIF volunteered for an indefinite time period and for service in any location. The CMF, on the other hand, were volunteers who enlisted for home defence and whose services had restrictions placed upon it, for example, the localities to which they could be sent. It's possible to determine if a person served in the AIF or the CMF simply by examining his or her service number. AIF service numbers consist of a single number with an alphabetical prefix for the state or territory in which they enlisted, an X prefix indicating enlistment in the AIF. CMF service numbers simply include an alphabetical prefix denoting the state of enlistment with the unique identifying number following. So as you can see on the slide, we have an example of an AIF service record for Francis Albert McNamara. You will be able to see that Francis enlisted in Paddington, New South Wales, and thus his service number contains an N prefix denoting New South Wales and an X denoting enlistment in the AIF. Note, additional F prefixes were used for female enlistees. Service records found in both the AIF and CMF series usually include the following key documents: attestation or the enlistment form setting out their personal details such as age, next of kin and former occupation. Heads and shoulder photograph may be included. Service and casualty forms, discharge forms summarising the person's service. Other documents or correspondence sometimes included death certificates, issues of medals, disciplinary matters, injury reports. Next, we have the Australian Air Force records. The National Archives holds World War II RAF service records dating back to 1921. These records are contained within two series, Series A9300, these are the officer files, and Series A9301, non-commissioned officers and other ranks. Officers' files within Series A9300 are arranged alphabetically by surname. A typical record usually contains the following key documents and information: the records of service form, again, age, next of kin, training, promotions. The record often contains other materials such as enlistment forms, conduct sheets, records of leave, and head and shoulder photographs of the enlistee. Non-commissioner officer files and other ranks in Series A9301 are arranged numerically by service number. A typical record in this series usually contains the following key documents and information: enlistment forms, conduct sheets, discharge information, medical history, head and shoulder photographs. Documents relating to conduct between the holding office and RAF members after the member left service is often sometimes found. Next, we have the Navy cards. The Royal Australian Navy kept cardboard index cards as service records from 1911 to 1970. These service cards contain personal details, including surnames, given names, service number, date and place of birth, religion, occupation, address, and details of next of kin. They also contain service details such as postings and awards. They're usually one or two cards for each person and they're double-sided. All our Navy cards have been digitised and are available freely online. So, as we mentioned at the start of the presentation, in 2019, the National Archives received $10 million from the federal government to spend over 4 years on the digitisation and release of those World War II service records which were not yet freely available. This equated at the time to 852,000 service records from the Army and Royal Australian Air Force. Access to World War I and World War II service records has and continues to be one of the most popular requests we receive here at the National Archives, with an average 10,000 requests received each year to access the World War II records alone. So the aim of this multi-year digitisation project was to provide a comprehensive and authoritative source of information for students, journalists, authors, academics, researchers, historians, filmmakers and families interested in knowing about the service and sacrifice of their relatives, and the creation of preservation digitisation surrogates and access copies for viewing by the public. By creating digital surrogates and access copies online, we can reduce the physical wear and tear on these original fragile and old paper records, whilst enabling people from across Australia and across the globe to view these records without having to visit Canberra. Let me be clear, the original paper records are still being kept, preserved and treated by our paper conservators as required, but having a digital copy helps to ensure that these records will be available for future generations. So in late 2019, we established our in-house team to administer the project, complete the movement of records in and out of custody, undertake quality assurance and loading of digital copies to our online public database record search, as well as ingest the digital surrogates into our digital preservation platform called Preservica. Given the size of the project, it was agreed that digitisation would also be undertaken using external digitisation providers. To facilitate this, we established a panel of experienced suppliers to provide end-to-end digitisation, using procedures and standards endorsed by the National Archives. Guidelines for handling and preparing and digitising the specific series of records were also provided to the suppliers, as well as detailed instructions about how to name files and prepare work reports to ensure that these precious records were tracked and accounted for throughout the digitisation process. Over the life of the project, we used 3 external digitisation providers located in Canberra, Sydney and Melbourne. Service records were digitised in the order in which they were accumulated, so by state of enlistment for Army, by service name for Air Force, those officer files, and service number for the non-commissioned officer RAF files. This project has been a team effort with many people contributing to its success from across many sections and locations at the National Archives. So what did we achieve? So despite a global pandemic throwing us a big midterm challenge, as at the 30th of June 2023, 803,907 files, over 15 million pages have been digitised. The vast majority, 616,073 files, have been digitised and loaded online freely on our record search. 187,834 files have been digitised and we're progressively loading them now to record search. This includes the vast majority of Army service files, as well as RAF Series A9300. A significant portion, 70% of the RAF non-commissioned officer files from Series 9301 have also been completed. So what's our next steps? Digitised records, as I said, are now progressively being made available online free of charge. To find out if a specific record has been digitised, the best place to start is through our online database record search, or you can enter through the Defence and War Services page on the National Archives webpage at naa.gov.au. Gina will also provide some further advice. Whatever record I want to access hasn't been digitised and made available online. In this instance, the best thing you can do is submit a request for World War II service records through the online form on our website. If a file you're after has been digitised and is cleared for access, our reference services team and our digitisation services teams will endeavour to have the specific file loaded to record search within 30 days, but we do try to do it sooner. In addition to continuing to digitise remaining World War II service files, the National Archives is also undertaking a project to digitise photographic negatives found on the RAF service files. Around 40% of the World War II Army and Air Force files include an identity photograph of the service person. Under the World War II digitisation project, photographic prints were digitised along with the service record. However, we did not have the funding to digitise the photographic negatives found on the service files. These negatives are either acetate or nitrate based. Both of these base compositions are inherently unstable, with nitrate negatives degrading more quickly due to their age. Once the degradation process has begun, it can be slowed by storing them at cold temperatures, but it can't be stopped. The only solution to preserving the image is to digitise them to the highest preservation standards we can, and then pop the original into freezer storage to slow down the degradation process. In July 2021, the National Archives received a donation of $1 million from philanthropist Ms. Barbara Mason. This donation is now going towards saving, through digitisation, the photographic negatives stored on the RAF and some Army files. The value of putting a face to the name cannot be understated. On the screen, you'll see Nancy May White. Nancy served in the Women's Auxiliary Australian Air Force during World War II, and like the RAF itself, celebrated her 100th birthday in 2021. Nan's file holds her enlistment photo, which was recently digitised and a copy provided to her family. It was a photograph her family had not seen. As I said at the beginning of this presentation, the World War Digitisation project was about much more than numbers and statistics, as impressive as they are. The project team captured hundreds of stories over the life of the project that tell unique stories of individuals, but also they've uncovered stories about broader aspects of Australian life and connections between individuals, communities, businesses, and the government. We also see links between records held in the National Archives collection that shed further light or context about these stories of service. We thought now we'd share with you a few of these stories. Enid Elizabeth Backhouse enlisted in the Women's Auxiliary Australian Air Force in January 1943 at the age of 24. Prior to enlisting, Enid attended evening classes at the University of Western Australia and studied literature via correspondence at the Literary Institute in London and Oxford University. Enid served as a section officer in Melbourne, and it was there that she wrote her first 3 novels while she was off duty. The National Archives holds in the collection the applications for literary and dramatic copyright for a number of Backhouse's novels, including The Sky Has Its Clouds and her 1946 children's story titled Inomi and Quentin. And Inomi and Quentin was described in an article published in the Western Australian paper on the 16th of November 1946 as a fairy book full of romance and make-believe, specially suitable as a gift for Christmas. Enid's service record contains a number of assessments by her commanding officers, as you'll see on the screen. In addition to the one that you see on the screen, the assessing officer concluded, "It is suggested that Backhouse is psychologically unsuitable for equipment duties. She is intelligent, and it is my opinion that we could make use of her literary ability in the Directorate of Public Relations." Following demobilisation, Enid worked as a scriptwriter with Quarter Films in England. She then returned to Australia in 1951 to care for her parents and continued to publish novels into the 1950s and 1960s. Alan Frank Reid was born in Ballarat, Victoria, and enlisted in the RAF at the age of 26. Reid completed over 44 operations in Europe, flying Lancaster bombers from June 1943 to March 1945. On the 3rd of March 1945, Reid was reported missing, presumed dead, following air operations over a canal in Germany. As noted above, this project assists researchers and families in building connections between records. In addition to the individual World War II service records, the National Archives also holds in our collection the main correspondence series compiled by the Royal Australian Air Force from 1922 to 1960. This series covers subjects such as general administration, but also includes casualty files for individuals who were injured or killed while serving in the RAF. These files provide an insight into the investigations undertaken by the government departments following a casualty report, as well as a poignant reminder of those receiving the sad news, as demonstrated on Reid's casualty file, as we see on the screen. Prolonged investigations have been carried out by the Missing Research and Inquiry Service in an endeavour to locate the place where your son's aircraft crashed and to recover his body for burial in a war cemetery, but unfortunately without success. In the circumstances, your son will be commemorated by including his name on a memorial to be erected by the Imperial War Graves Commission overlooking the Thames at Runnymede, to the memory of all the air crew members who lost their lives in Northwest Europe and who have no known graves. The letter concludes, "May I again assure you of the sincere sympathy of this department in your loss." Whilst COVID-19 was a pretty horrid time for all of us, it did provide one of our project team members with the opportunity to collate together a collection of letters found on the World War II service files, or at least the ones that jumped out at him due to their ornate and detailed letterheads, or for the insight they provided into a person or an Australian business. In addition to providing an insight into an individual, these letters of reference can also show the pressures that were placed on businesses back home. In a letter guaranteeing a job for Harold Leslie Addison Noakes at Adair's Brothers Drapery, today Adair's, the writer explains that the manager had suffered a complete mental and physical breakdown in consequence of the shortage of competent staff. Within the service file of Mervyn Freeman, we see a letter that was sent to the Secretary of the Air Board of the Department of Air by F.A. McCready, the manager of the Australian Fish Derivative Company, seeking Freeman's release from the RAF in order for him to resume his civil occupation, a deep-sea fisherman specialising in shark fishing. The letter, dated August 1944, notes that the chief reason for the Australian Fish Derivative Company's interest and support for Mervyn's release is that they're now the main producing organisation in Australia of vitamised fish liver oil, replacing the previously imported and now unpeculable cod liver oils and other high-potency vitamins. Due to the demands for these products, particularly by the services, maintaining supplies was becoming more and more acute owing to the restricted number of fishermen available. Mervyn was granted a discharge in September 1944. Relevance today. On the 2nd of August this year, you may be aware that the Australian War Memorial unveiled a sculpture of Lieutenant Colonel Vivian Bullwinkle on its grounds. The first sculpture of an individual nurse or woman to be installed at the memorial. The sculpture recognises not only but all Australian nurses who have lost their lives, survived atrocities, or made sacrifices while serving their country. Within the World War II service records held in the National Archives, where you can also see these stories of sacrifice and loss, including one of Vivian Bullwinkle's fellow nurses, Sister Alma May Beard. Sister Alma May Beard was born in Western Australia and joined the Australian Army Nursing Service in 1941. Sister Beard was attached to the 2nd 13th Australian General Hospital, then based in Malaya. Sister Beard was one of 65 Australian nurses and 250 civilians, including women and children, evacuated from Singapore on the 12th of February 1941 aboard the ill-fated Vinabrook. The Vinabrook was bombed by Japanese aircraft and sank in the Banker Strait on the 14th of Feb 1942. Of the 65 nurses on board, 12 were lost at sea and 32 survived the sinking but were captured as prisoners of war, of which 8 later died during captivity. Sister Beard was one of the remaining 22 nurses who also survived the sinking and were washed ashore on Raja Beach, Banker Island, where they surrendered to the Japanese along with other survivors. On the 16th of February 1942, the Japanese executed the men and then forced the women, including Sister Beard, into the sea and machine gunned them from behind. Only one nurse, Vivian Bullwinkle, survived. I share this courageous story because in an era of 24-hour news and instant communication, Sister Beard's service file demonstrates a world where this was not the case. The record of service forms located in Sister Beard's service record illustrates the confusion and the delays experienced at the time in trying to determine her fate. We can see that Sister Beard disembarked at Singapore on the 20th of September 1941, but from there we see multiple entries recorded over the next 4 years. The last entry on the 21st December 1945 reads, "Deceased whilst a POW, executed by the Japanese." On February 11, 2019, the Australian College of Nursing attended the last post ceremony at the Australian Memorial in Canberra to commemorate Sister Beard. She's also commemorated through the Alma Beard Community Health Centre in WA. The stories shared today are just a snapshot of the World War II service files that are being digitised and available online through the National Archives website and online through our database record search. Gina will share with you now how you can access the World War II service files and many other records at the National Archives using the National Archives online collection management database record search. Gina will also highlight other war service records held in our collection.
Thanks, Rebecca, and some sobering but lovely stories that come out of that World War II digitisation project. From our perspective here, and as Rebecca said, I'm the person who leads the reference services section in our national office in Canberra. Our staff have been very closely involved with the World War II digitisation project, supporting access as the project has gone on. And I think our staff have learned an enormous amount about the records, but also about the stories that have come out. And we feel privileged to have been part of that journey and a part of that project. My job today is a pleasurable one, but hopefully I won't blind you with too much detail. It is partly just to tell you, as Rebecca noted, how you might want to explore and search the collection, particularly for World War II records, but not exclusively, because noting that we have probably around about 44 million records in the collection nationally. Whilst these are an extraordinarily significant part of that collection, there's a whole lot more to explore. And so I guess leading into that, the website is a good place to start. So you will see, for example, when you go to our homepage, and I'll show a picture of that in a moment, that at the top of the homepage, there is a tab that says Explore the Collection. So you can see that on the left-hand side of the screen. As Rebecca mentioned, you'll see a page for Defence and War Service records that leads you into a whole lot of other pages with information about specific topics or records. That's on the right-hand side of the screen. Many of these pages take you to specific topic areas with links to series, and Rebecca mentioned some of those main World War II series earlier on. Or the records, sometimes we refer to them as items in our online database record search. You might also like to start with the Researching War Service page, which you can see on that screen, which has a whole lot of information and links to other organisations as well. I guess I should acknowledge that many of you may well be experienced researchers in doing this sort of work, but some of you may well be doing this for the first time. So if you are, welcome. And there's always advice that we can give you. Don't hesitate to come and talk to us. So that's exploring the collection. If you're looking at searching the collection online, some of you may well be familiar with our online database that Rebecca mentioned earlier. So Record Search is our online collection database that you could search. And there are two links that you can find. One on the homepage, and you can see on that left-hand side image of the homepage a button that says Record Search, which is in the middle of the homepage, or as we showed on the previous screen, under the Explore the Collection tab. Once you get into Record Search, you can do what is called a basic search, just for a name, for example. This may give you lots of results, or it may not. But if you want to try going to the advanced search and have a look at the advanced, what comes up on the screen on that bottom right-hand corner, you'll see you can be a bit more targeted about the level at which you want to go in and what you can search. If you click on the Items tab, items means individual records, and start your search there, you can enter more information that you might know. So if you know more details, including, for example, the person's service number and their place of birth, that's a bonus. You can also use wildcards in your search. That means you can put an asterisk in where you think you might not have the exact spelling. And these are particularly useful if you're not sure of spelling, but if you're not sure of whether something has a plural on it, for example. The image, so as I said, the image on the bottom right of the screen is what you see when you click on Advanced Search. You might want to do a search on that item level to find a specific person, but you might be interested in looking more broadly in what's in a specific series or a group of records as well. Main message, though, is if you run into any problems, you can't find what you're looking for, always get in touch with us by email or by completing an online form. If you go to the Ask Us About the Collection page, and you'll see that highlighted in the top right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see how to get in touch. You can email us or you can fill in a form that allows you to give us a bit more detail about what you're searching for. Please, I guess it's worth noting, as I said, 44 million records in the collection as an estimate. While all the service records in the 6 main World War II service records series have their own individual entry in our record search database, which means you should be able to search by name with some spelling variations, not all other records are described at that level. So hence, if you can't find something, it doesn't mean we don't have it. It just means you might have to ask us a few questions and we can help you. So what does it look like when you do a search online and you get a result? Here's a simple example. I've used the advanced search screen at that item level or that individual records level to search for Oliver Bowerman. And you can see that on the left-hand side of the screen. In this example, I've added the series number B884 because I know it's where this record is, but you don't have to. Just be aware, though, that if you put in a name, you'll find all the items or all the records that contain that name. So you might have to then sort through them. And that's particularly a trick if you are looking for someone who might have a fairly common surname. So I guess the main message there is the more information you have that you can put in to start your search, the more targeted your search is going to be. So in the middle of the screen, you'll see a screenshot of what that search returns. In this case, one record, which looks like it's the Army service record for Oliver Bowerman that I want. On that page, there on that screenshot, you can see a little image icon in the top right-hand corner of the screen. If you can see this icon, and you will see that for, as Rebecca explained, the majority of World War II service records and more to come, this means there's a digital image available online. In this case, a series of JPEG images, one for each page in the record. If you click on this icon, you open up the page viewer that shows you the first page of the record, and that's what you see on the right-hand side of the screen. And that comes up with the first JPEG page. You can look at the JPEG images separately. You can scroll through them. But if you want to produce a PDF of the whole record, which you can view or download and save, there's a way to do this too. On that page viewer page, there is a little icon. You'll see the black icons at the bottom underneath the text about the record. The one on the far right is the dynamic PDF generator, which will generate a PDF of the whole record, which you can then download to your own device. So this is a very, very quick and very basic introduction to how to search for service records. The main message, though, is the more information you have, the more targeted your search results will be, but it doesn't matter if you don't have a lot of information. You will still come up with results, and if you don't find what you're looking for, please talk to us. One of the other things, though, I wanted to talk to you about, because I guess I'm assuming that there might be some interest out there about other service records that we have in our collection. So World War II is our focus today, but I'm going to go sideways for a minute just to talk about a few other kinds of service records that we hold, because our collection of them is diverse and it's rich in its detail. So, I mean, this is a very busy page, and I'm not going to talk to the individual images there just now. I just wanted to give you an idea of just the range of things you might see. So, in general, National Archives holdings on defence date largely from 1901, but include some colonial records, such as some of those from the Boer War. Though our holdings of defence-related records are vast, they don't include all defence records created by the Australian Government. So many of you might be familiar that the Australian War Memorial holds most of the operational records of war, records about units and operations, including, for example, unit diaries. National Archives holds the service records, including those for civilian service. We also hold defence policy records, including high-level records, such as War Cabinet records from World War II. And Rebecca also mentioned in the context of RAF what we call the correspondence series, which can include detailed records about casualties. Rebecca's already mentioned, and you may already know about World War I records. All of those records are now digitised, and they were, as Rebecca explained, a gift to the nation in 2007, where we received direct government funding. What you might not always also know is that there are records of those who did not make it into the first AIF in World War I, who were rejected for enlistment. We are just very close, if not completed, digitising those records. Physically, actually, I'll go on to talk about that. I'll go on to talk about World War I now. So, as I said, we hold all the first AIF personnel dossiers and the originals of these records are held in Canberra. I mentioned the separate series that is those rejected from enlistment. Those records are the originals are held in our Melbourne office, and they are progressively being digitised. So if you want some more information about those records, again, do a bit of a search, but please get in touch if you can't find what you need. On this screen, you can see a range of service dossiers, including, on the far left-hand side, for a man called William Punch, who was an Aboriginal serviceman from Goulburn in New South Wales, who enlisted in 1915, served in France, and died in a military hospital in Bournemouth in 1917. You'll also see part of the very extensive record for General Sir John Monash in the lower left. In the middle part of the screen, two images there are from a record for a man called Arthur Percy Sullivan, who won a VC when serving in the North Russia Relief Force, which he joined after being demobbed in the UK. Sullivan died very tragically and unfortunately in an accident as a result of a fall in 1937 in London, when he was part of the Australian contingent for the coronation of King George VI. And to the right of the screen, some of my favourite records from World War I that I've used in talking to people in the past are the records of three nurses, Evelyn, Janet and Flora, all from the same Gallagher family from the Bungendore area outside Canberra. The family was well known in the area. There's lots of newspaper reports about their activities during the war, and all of them served overseas as nurses in the First World War. What I also wanted to talk to you about was post-World War II service records in another series in the archives called B2458. Some of you might be familiar with them, but maybe not. This series holds the Army service records we have in custody that document post-war Army service. It's important to know that these include records of service for people who enlisted after World War II, irrespective of whether they saw active service in a post-World War II conflict or not, and records of those, and it also can contain records of those who served in World War I and or World War II, who continued to serve post those wars and or into the interwar periods in some cases. So you may have someone who served in the interwar period but then did not serve in World War II. In some cases, you have records for people who served in World War I, had a break, served in World War II, and then continued. So there are multiple combinations of service that the records in that series encompass. In general terms, service records for more recent campaigns, including Korea, Malaya, and Vietnam, are still held by the Department of Defence. But there is a public right of access to those records, and when you apply to us at the National Archives for records that are in the open period, which is currently up to and including 2002. And from 1st of January next year, that will include records for 2003. It's important to note, though, that former serving members can apply directly to the Department of Defence or in the particular service that holds your records for access to your records. So you don't have to go through the National Archives if you are the serving member. The Department of Defence website includes a summary from World War I to present, explaining where service and health records are held. And we can provide that link in the chat a bit later on. Just thought I'd show you a few of the records that this series currently contains that are digitised and available online. So on the bottom right, you have Lieutenant General Robert Nimmo, who was a senior army officer who served in World War I, World War II, with the British Commonwealth Occupation Force in Japan, as General Officer Commanding Northern Command in Australia, and finally as a Chief Military Observer to the United Nations Military Observer Group in India and Pakistan from 1950 until his death in 1966. Moving to the middle of the screen, you will see a record for Errol Nowak. Private Errol Nowak was the first national serviceman to die in Vietnam in 1966, just 10 days into his active service on country. He'd not long turned 21. Below Private Nowak's service record, you can see a couple of images including a discharge certificate and some photographs from a man called Augustine George McAuliffe, who enlisted in 1948 and saw service in Korea and Japan in 1952 before being discharged in 1954. Records on the right-hand side are for a man called Harry Smith, who retired with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, saw service in World War I, during the interwar period, World War II, and post-war service until 1950. So that gives you an idea of the range of records that are held in that particular series. We also have post-war records for the RAF in another series, A12372, and that encompasses all ranks, and a subsequent series that covers different kinds of Navy records that follow on from the ones that Rebecca talked about earlier. And finally, I just want to give you a little bit of a taster about other service records. I guess one of the things I want to tell you about is that the Australian experience of war and war service included people who served in civilian service or whose lives were affected by the impact of World War II policies. I'm not going to talk in detail about what you can see on the screen, except to just note the sorts of records they encompass. So the top far left, we have an example of a munitions worker record from World War I. A number of thousands of men and sometimes their families went to the UK to do munitions work in World War I. This was a Commonwealth government program. We hold the records of those munitions workers. The originals are held in Melbourne, and there is some consideration to looking at digitising those records so that they will be freely available. In the bottom far left, the Mercantile Marine. Up the top underneath the heading, Prisoner of War records. Records of both the Civilian Alien Corps and the Civilian Constructional Corps. Some records of the Land Army, not complete, but many held, for example, in our Sydney office. top right-hand corner are courts-martial records. And in the middle, two pages from enemy alien internment records. For both, we hold them for both World War I and World War II. I think it's really important to acknowledge that we hold these records because, as I said, this is the fulsome experience of people in those world wars, and they represent what happened at home, but also the impact on families across the country at the time. That's me. I think Rebecca has a couple of other things to talk to you about, so I'll hand back over to her and we'll talk a bit later.
Thanks so much, Gina. We just thought that we would share, before we go to questions, and we do have a slide of some additional images that have been digitised under the Face to the Name project as well. Just wanted to share one last relevant story of an unexpected find from the World War II digitisation project. So this story demonstrates that in a very small way, the ongoing daily relevance of stories we find captured in the World War II service files that are almost 80 years old. So over a year, the project team, our in-house project team, uncovered literally piece by piece Australian government World War II hygiene and disease prevention posters. It appears that these posters were hung perhaps throughout kitchens, mess halls, latrines within the RAF barracks, and often then torn apart and the reverse used as a form of documentation or writing paper. These notes then found their way into the National Archives collection via the World War II service files. In January 2022, and with much excitement and cheering, the last piece of the puzzle was located, enabling the true beauty and relevant advice to be shared with a whole new generation. And with the help of our photographic digitisation team, the posters have been able to join together to enable their true beauty to be experienced and shared. And so as you can see on the screen here, you'll see the front of a page we found in a RAF World War II service file, and then the back page, you'll see that the pieces we find. And I think if Gina flicks to the next slide, these are what we've done. So we found 2 posters, 8 pieces in total, and we've been able to put those back together. And given that this was coming to us during COVID, we thought it was really relevant. So that's kind of where we end the formal part of our presentation today. We did have a moment for questions. I have responded. There was a couple of questions that have come through the chat, so thank you for that. Just in response to, the Merchant Navy during World War II. Gina, I'm not sure if you had anything to add. I was just saying that we do have series relating to campaign awards for the seafarers who were part of the Merchant Navy. These records have all been listed at item level, so you'll see the person's name, their date of birth and the place of enlistment, place of birth. So there's about 7,000 records in total. They've not been proactively digitised, but we have been doing them in response. So that may be the next thing on our list. We had a query from Erie. It's actually, I thought I'd raise this question as well. So the question was around previously received a World War II service file that had some information withheld. I guess that does say that whilst these records are up to 80 years old, they may still, the archive still has a responsibility, particularly if the person is still alive, to make sure that information we make available to the public. We do make an assessment before that happens. We don't see a lot of that, but there could be some personal sensitivities that we feel we don't want that information to be released. So I think, Erie, in response to yours, and I'll send you a message as well, you can now, once the person has passed away as well, a lot of those personal sensitivities are no longer. I say that with a little asterisk because that may not always be the case, but you can certainly go back and re-request that file be access examined again, and we can go ahead and make those records, digitise that record for you. So there is information on the website, but I'll also send you an email, send you a chat, and also you can send us an email